This is the second Sunday after the Epiphany, and even though our focus during this coming year is going to be on the Gospel of Mark, the second Sunday after the Epiphany always brings us to John's Gospel, specifically the first chapter of John. And we are here right still at the beginning of that message, and our reading today is going to tell us about what happens next after Christ's baptism, which we celebrated last week. But John's version of the events is a little bit different than the other gospel writers. For example, John doesn't really give us a baptism story, just as he doesn't tell us anything about Jesus' birth or childhood or even the temptation in the desert. But he does give us some insight into the relationship between Jesus and John the Baptist. In the verses just before today's reading, we see John the Baptist pointing to Jesus and encouraging his own disciples to start following the one whose sandals I'm not worthy to untie. And they do. Andrew goes and finds his brother Simon and brings him to Jesus, and Jesus gives him a new name, Peter. But here we are at the very beginning. The story is just getting started. So hear the word of the Lord as given to us in John 1, beginning at verse 43. The next day, Jesus decided to go to Galilee. He found Philip and said to him, "Follow me." Now, Philip was from Bethsaida, the city of Andrew and Peter. Philip found Nathanael and said to him, "We have found him about whom Moses in the law and also the prophets wrote, Jesus, son of Joseph from Nazareth." Nathanael said to him, "Can anything good come out of Nazareth?" Philip said to him, "Come and see." When Jesus saw Nathanael coming toward him, he said of him, "Here is truly an Israelite in whom there is no deceit." Nathanael asked him, "Where did you get to know me?" Jesus answered, "I saw you under the fig tree before Philip called you." Nathanael replied, "Rabbi, you are the Son of God. You are the King of Israel." Jesus answered, "Do you believe because I told you that I saw you under the fig tree? You will see greater things than these." And he said to him, "Very truly, I tell you, you will see heaven opened and the angels of God ascending and descending upon the Son of Man." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Now, several different threads are woven through these verses, connecting them to what has gone before and what is going to follow. Now, last week, I spoke about an idea of liminality that is in this season of Epiphany over and over. We see it again in this passage. Remember that the word liminal means threshold. It comes from the root of the word liminal is the Latin word for threshold. The revealing or epiphany of Jesus as the Christ brings people to the threshold of transformation. Last week, the Magi were changed as they crossed that threshold. Their lives were transformed as they bowed in worship before the Holy Child. And they went home by a different way. And now, as Jesus calls his first disciples, we see each of them stand on that threshold between what was and what God is making new in Jesus. In the verses just before today's reading, we hear the story of how Simon is transformed. His transformation is so complete that he gets a whole new name out of it. And that brings us to Philip. Now, Philip shows us a couple of themes that we're going to recognize throughout the season of Epiphany. One of those themes is the idea of finding or being found. We hear the word 3 times in the first 2 verses of this passage. Jesus finds Philip, and then Philip finds Nathanael, and he tells him, "We have found the one about whom Moses and the prophets wrote." Have you ever been found? Once when I was a little girl, I spent a wonderful afternoon visiting our next-door neighbor, Mrs. Braden. We picked fresh mint from the little patch by her back door. We made iced tea and put the mint into the tea. And we sat very elegantly in the living room as we sipped our iced tea and visited. And then after the tea was finished, we went back to the kitchen and I helped her set the table for Mr. Braden's supper. And then it was time to go home, and I skipped away feeling very proud of myself because I had neither spilled tea on her couch or dropped the glass and broken it. And then I saw my mom. She was running down the alley, and she had a look on her face that was equal parts anger and fear and relief. She was relieved to see me, but she'd been looking for me all afternoon. She had looked all over the neighborhood. And when she saw me, I was found, but I didn't even realize I'd been lost. I wonder if that's how Philip felt when Jesus went looking for him, when Jesus found him and said, "Follow me." And did you notice that Jesus is the one who found Philip? It wasn't the other way around. Jesus was looking specifically for him, and then Philip went looking for Nathanael. Now, Nathanael only shows up here in John's gospel. The other gospel writers list Bartholomew right after Philip's name in the list of disciples, and so it's quite plausible that Nathanael and Bartholomew are the same person, especially because Bartholomew isn't really a personal name. It just means son of Ptolemaeus. We might see Nathanael, or Bartholomew, as a skeptic with his challenge to Philip. Can anything good come out of Nazareth? And we don't know much about him outside of this story, but Jesus knows him. Where we see blunt skepticism, Jesus sees complete honesty. And this is the point where Nathanael steps onto the threshold between his old assumptions and his new reality. It's also where we see another theme emerging. It's one that will continue to show up over the next several weeks. And it's that theme of seeing or being seen. In John's gospel, seeing is always a metaphor for a deeper awareness, an awakening to faith, and a clearer understanding of who Jesus is. But notice how this threshold experience is initiated by Jesus. Jesus sees Nathanael coming toward him. He tells him before Philip said, "Come and see," Jesus had already seen Nathanael sitting under the fig tree. We often think of coming to faith as our own eyes being opened to the truth of the gospel. We look for a clearer understanding of who Jesus is. We seek the kingdom of God and its righteousness. But in this story, it's Jesus who's doing the seeing, and Jesus